Pogchamps 2 is continuing with xQc going up against David Pakman. As always, this is a match where there are 2 games and a 3rd game tiebreaker if needed, and David Pakman starts with the white pieces in the first game and plays a very solid opening. This is not something typically you see in beginner level gameplay, but it's really solid actually, and you prepare the move d4, which is executed right now, and overall you just aim to really get that full central control that you want in the start of the game. And this move signifies that you're going to be kind of transitioning into a closed position. Both of these pawns, all 4 of these pawns actually cannot capture each other. So that means that usually the position is going to be more closed. And because of how close this is to black's territory, xQc will have a lot of trouble developing, like, for example, this dark square bishop. He's going to have to hikaru it if he wants to get it out fast and castle kingside. So there will be some trouble when it comes to developing. But both players overall should be okay here. Now, the knight, if the knight went here, key thing here, you could trap the knight. So it's very good bringing the knight here back. I think this is the best position. Maybe trying to, re-put it somewhere on the king side. And overall, that could be very successful for xQc. And now you see this very nice c6 push. So both players playing very fantastic chess so far. And the idea with c6 is to open up this pawn formation here, because once again xQc is having a little trouble developing any of these pieces here. Like even the queen, the bishop is okay right now, but the queen and even this rook and the other rook, it's going to be hard to get those into the game with the current position. So xQc tries to open it up, but David Pakman plays a wonderful move, c4, saying if you take, I take, and we're in the same position, it's going to be hard for you to develop. Now, obviously also for David Pakman, it might be a little bit more challenging than if it was open, but it definitely right now is a lot worse for xQc because of how these pawns are pushed farther back, if you will. And now the position just closes up even further, and David Pakman castles. The bishop is sent on a mission here. And you might be thinking that now maybe we'll see a queenside castle because it's way easier to develop these pieces, and it's also way more natural to develop these pieces than try to force something with this bishop here, which might actually end up hurting xQc because, for example, if this move, well, now you're limiting the space that the knight can move to. So there are, it's a very complicated position here, and you really need to think of a game plan and stick to it. And it seems like xQc is going with the game plan of moving out these pieces and then castling queenside. Here, both players take out their bishop, and this is a very high-level move, by the way. I didn't really comment on it, but just ignoring this threat here, which obviously is not a threat, and now if take, you'll notice that now there's going to be more pressure on this knight here, especially with the move g3, which was played right now. And g3 is a really bad move, I have to say. The reason for this is that you are strengthening these pawns next to the king, but at the same time you're weakening all of these light squares. So bishop coming here to h3 is now always going to be a threat because there's no pawn here on g2, so you can always hit the rook here on f1. And now xQc takes away this bishop, great move, and the bishop comes here. Now if you take and take, like I said, there's pressure here, it's probably good for xQc, but the bishop coming here is actually a very good idea. Maybe what's going on is that David Pakman is trying to open up with a move like b4, the queen side, because he recognizes that most likely xQc will have to castle queenside because of how the current position is. And so by opening it up, you allow all your pieces to kind of transport there and then start attacking the king. So I think that bishop coming here is a really nice high-level move. And now this is maybe the first inaccuracy of the game. It isn't like a horrible move or anything, but it is a little bit of a mistake because it doesn't really do anything. You might say, well, it's preparing this move, but it really isn't because of, obviously, if take, xQc will just be down a pawn. So it seems like xQc doesn't really realize that this bishop here has the ability to control these squares on this diagonal, and you'll notice that this move is played anyways. Also, another thing I didn't comment on, when the bishop comes back, the position changed. Not only did the bishop obviously come back, but also this pawn is now undefended, so the knight can potentially take it here, but instead xQc is kind of fixed on this pawn breakthrough on the queen side, and this is a pretty bad move, allowing the bishop to come here to h3 and hit the rook, because now the rook will not be able to move along the first rank and will be trapped. And you'll notice that actually ends up happening in a couple of moves, I believe. Yeah, so exactly, the rook is lost, and David Pakman is going to be under a lot of pressure and a little bit and he's going to have a little bit less material. But in exchange for this, he does have a lot of attacks going on the queen side. You'll notice all of these pieces are right now kind of supporting this queen side attack, which is why castling here is a horrible move. You're going to get all of these all of these pieces here going to the queen side. So if you castle queen side, this king is now going to be under a lot of pressure, which is exactly what happens in the future. Here you could even push forward, and then maybe that's a way for you to bring your bishop into the game. But instead you take here, which is a little bit bad because, again, it's not going to be as easy bringing your bishop into the game. But you still have a lot of ways to attack, like bringing this bishop, and then forking these two pieces. There's just a lot of pressure on the king because xQc decides to castle queenside. So in this case, it would have probably been better to hold off on castling and maybe play a move like bishop e7, which is not really a great move, but just so you can get your king safe for the time being. And now you're going to win back that exchange that you lost here. And David Pakman goes on the attack, plays a wonderful move, queen to f3, threatens mate, with the help of this pawn if the move f6 is played, which is exactly what's played, and mate happens right now. So David Pakman has the first win in game 1. Let's see what happens in game 2. So game 2, xQc has the white pieces and is faced against a very strong Sicilian defense. This one in particular is one that I really enjoy playing because the idea with the move d6 is preparing the move knight to f6 and going with the fianchetto on this side. But the idea is that you're stopping the move e5, kicking away the knight. So d6 stops the move e5, which usually would be very annoying. David Pakman goes very nicely. This is a very good setup that I enjoy using. Fianchettoing the bishop, getting a quick castle, of course taking on d4, and then getting a very quick castle and having a very nice position. And now xQc blunders a piece with the move f4 because he allows the move e5, forking both of the minor pieces. And obviously David Pakman will win one of the minor pieces. And actually xQc takes the pawn here. He could have maybe done a different idea, which is taking here or moving here and then pawn here and then queen taking, and then there's a lot of pressure here. But regardless, he will be down some material, so taking is okay here. And now the knight moves here, maybe trying to form some attacks. For example, let's say a blank move like h6. Well, now you have the ability to start attacking the rook. So there are some attacking possibilities with the knight here on the queen side. But instead the queen comes here, shuts down any ideas of hitting the rook, and shuts down the idea of trading and then hitting the rook. The knight finds itself in a very good spot where it can just cause a lot of trouble for David Pakman, just kind of in the heart of the defense for black. And we'll see how they decide to deal with it. So David Pakman just sends the queen on a mission here. And usually counterattacking can be very strong. Here, I don't know if it was the best solution. It is a very strong idea still, but the point is there is still great possibilities of attacking here on the king side. And that's exactly what happens. Now here, David Pakman takes with the knight, which is a huge blunder because there's actually a forced mate in 5 moves here, which it seems like there isn't. But xQc finds the first move, which is moving the queen here. The bishop is forced back here. I mean, you can also sack a knight, but let's say that the bishop is forced back here. And now you can actually take this knight, again using the fact that this rook here is pinned for your advantage. And then there's a very nice mate with just taking all these pieces here, forcing the king back and mating. But instead of finding that, he took the rook here. So he didn't get the mate, but he did get quite a lot of material. But in this position, I believe actually after another check, I think that the material is quite equal. In fact, I think that black actually has the material advantage just because of all these minor pieces that black has compared to only the one knight. So right now, I think David Pakman has the material advantage, but xQc is finding very creative ways to attack. So for example, bringing the knight here, trying to reroute it to here, hitting obviously the king, and then maybe somehow attacking it with the help of this discovery. There's just some attacking possibilities that xQc is finding, so very impressive. But another thing that you have to notice is that the black king can be trapped here with the move b1, right? So if, for example, again, a blank move h6, well, now the queen here is trapped with the help of obviously all these 3 pieces. So, black has to do something to defend against it. You can bring the queen back here because it's defended by the bishop. You could also make a move like a6, which is a very creative move because it doesn't, initially look like you're actually defending the queen. But the idea is if this move, you take the knight and now you're also attacking the other queen. So that's a very good solution that David Pakman actually found. But here, rather than going into this line, which probably will not end well for white, xQc goes ahead and plays c7, trying to reroute the knight maybe to hit the king like I was talking about. The knight comes here, puts pressure on the queen, and the thing you have to understand here is that the knight coming here is still possible because this is check, but the attack will not be as strong because notice that now if the king moves here, there isn't really that discovery because you'll just lose your queen. So when you're getting attacked, usually attacking your opponent will be a weaker attack. So here, rather than moving here, maybe you should try to, move your queen back or something. But xQc goes into this line anyways, and the bishop takes, the queen takes, so everything seems to be fine for both players. Now David Pakman activates his rook in a very good fashion by hitting the queen. And now actually this very nice move, well actually it's a very bad move, but a very good idea, which is trying to counterattack on this other queen. But the problem is that actually David Pakman can take here, because if takes, well obviously now black can take this queen, and if instead takes, or sorry, here, if instead takes, well now you can, if instead takes, well now you can take here with check and only then recapture. So you'll notice that that queen here taking on b1 is a very good idea, but instead just taking the queen immediately and now blundering a pawn here on b7, which is not something that both of these players shown, because so far they've played some wonderful chess, not really blundering important things. David Pakman blundered mate, but beyond that, they were playing very good chess, and this is one of the highest level matches that I've ever seen. These two players are really fantastic. But in the end, they do get into time trouble, so they do some blunders, and we'll get to that in just a second. So they blunder a pawn here. King is not forced, but king moves over here to h6. Now the other rook gets activated, and just a lot of moves that don't necessarily have an important purpose, but are just, moves to play some moves. Although this move actually does attack a bishop, and so a move like this, which defends it, runs into this move, which now attacks the knight, and if the knight moves, you lose your bishop. So here, actually, David Pakman lost material, and then takes another pawn. So overall, if we count the material, we have 2 rooks for a rook and 2 pieces, and in pawns we have 3 versus, 3 on this side, and then 2 versus 1. So the material is a little bit better for David Pakman, but it's a very close call. And so the game is really still going on. This move just hits the rook. The rook moves back, attacks the knight actually, but the knight, notice, is defended, and it also attacks the pawn. So here you should defend the pawn by maybe moving here, rather than looking at this piece like this knight is also attacked and now moving the knight and losing a pawn, which is actually what happened. So notice that the knight was defended, and you should have just defended the pawn instead. There is a check that happens. The king moves to h1, and the game continues in just a lot of moves. This is move right now 31, and you'll notice that both players are relatively in time pressure. It's probably around 2 minutes for both players, and so they're just playing relatively fast moves that don't necessarily have a huge tactical or strategical plan behind them, but just moves that maybe do a simple attack or do a simple move that just makes a piece have a good position. And so you'll see that they just do these kind of, it's almost like a dance, if you will. They just move all these pieces around just because they're trying to gain time. Every time you make a move, you do gain 5 seconds. So they're just kind of moving around. There was opportunities somewhere to, before the bishop moves here, you could have played a move like h4 and threaten a very big attack with the pawns on the king, and threaten even mate, I believe. But instead, they just continue moving more passively, I guess. And now there is a chance to trade here, but instead the position is closed up, making a passed pawn for white, which can become very dangerous if black doesn't manage to control it. And now check, the king moves, the pawn checks, and just blunders a pawn. So this is another blunder that happened. This time David Pakman gets the pawn. But there's a huge blunder that happens right now, losing the rook. So that's another blunder, and that's kind of what happens in time pressure. Players don't have the luxury of thinking over the move, as thoroughly as they want, and so they just lose material. But actually, you'll notice after this check, that the other rook is blundered. So xQc seemed like he was in a great position, but then blunders his rook, and the game continues. And so again, that's kind of what happens in time pressure. From here, the bishops move on. You'll notice that here, xQc blunders his rook again, so it almost seems like game over, but let's still be careful with that saying, because we'll see what happens. He blunders his pawn, or loses his pawn, maybe not blundering, but his pawn is gone, but he still has this very dangerous pawn that he might be able to promote. So xQc is still not out of the game, especially if David Pakman, tries to worry about this side of the board and kind of forgets to defend against the passed pawn here. But he does manage to defend very successfully. In fact, a move like bishop a5 really stops white at anything they want to do, because they can never push, because then you just trade the pawn for the bishop and take your advantage on the king side. But instead, he actually blunders his bishop here. Maybe because he didn't realize that the bishop can come here and just he can trade it. But he blunders his bishop, but he does find a very nice spot for his knight, stopping the pawn from ever pushing. So now white kind of has to reroute and kick the knight out, which is what happens. After a trade of pawns here, the king tries to get here, but David Pakman just quickly promotes, and from here it is game over, because you have to understand that a draw means that David Pakman moves on because he won, or he wins the match because he won the first game. And so here he just plays a couple of checks, and eventually he even allows the queen to promote and gets the forced draw. And the game ends like this. So xQc unfortunately does not win this match. I did kind of want him to win, and let me know down below who you wanted to win. But that's the result that we got. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more Pogchamps in the future, make sure you subscribe. And thank you guys for watching. Peace out.